The forest has always been a symbol of balance, resilience, and interconnection. It is where sunlight filters into green canopies, where oxygen is produced and carbon is stored, where ecosystems weave together in delicate harmony. But in an age of climate disruption and human technological ambition, that forest is no longer only a natural sanctuary. It is becoming something else, a contested space where machines, power, and survival converge. The electric forest is not merely a metaphor for renewable energy or technological progress. It is an image of a world where geoengineering entwines itself with nature's cycles, where power grids crisscross landscapes once wild, and where the fight for Earth's future plays out in the intersection of ecology, politics, and human ambition. Geoengineering, the deliberate intervention in planetary systems to control the climate, often focuses on the sky, blocking sunlight, capturing carbon, or altering clouds. Yet forests, both natural and engineered, are central to these visions. They are Earth's original carbon capture machines, absorbing vast amounts of carbon dioxide and anchoring ecosystems across continents. In geoengineering proposals, forests play two roles. One is restorative, massive reforestation and afforestation projects designed to absorb atmospheric carbon. The other is technological, forests transformed into electric landscapes, sites for solar farms, wind turbines, and bioenergy production. In both cases, the forest becomes a frontier of human intervention, reshaped to serve as both battleground and hope in the fight against climate collapse. The idea of harnessing forests for geoengineering is not new. Planting trees has long been promoted as a natural climate solution. But when scaled to geoengineering proportions, reforestation becomes something far more ambitious and far more complicated. Planting billions or even trillions of trees could, in theory, absorb significant amounts of carbon. Yet such projects raise questions of feasibility and justice. Where will these trees be planted? Whose land will be used? What happens when monoculture plantations replace biodiverse ecosystems? In some countries, vast afforestation programs have displaced indigenous communities, degraded soil, or created water scarcity. The electric forest is therefore not simply a vision of green abundance, but a contested terrain, where efforts to engineer nature may replicate patterns of exploitation and imbalance. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, BCCS, is another form of the electric forest. This technology envisions growing massive amounts of biomass, often fast-growing trees or grasses, burning it for energy, and capturing the resulting carbon emissions for storage underground. In theory, this process generates power while pulling carbon from the atmosphere, creating negative emissions. But the scale required is staggering. To make a significant dent in global emissions, B would require land the size of India or more, competing with food production and natural ecosystems. Forests, in this context, are no longer valued primarily for their biodiversity or cultural significance, but as fuel and carbon sponges in a planetary machine. The electric forest becomes a sacrifice zone, where natural cycles are subordinated to human-engineered systems. The electrification of forests also takes more literal forms. Across the world, forests are increasingly intersected by power lines, wind farms, and solar arrays. Renewable energy is essential for survival, but its footprint is not invisible. Vast solar farms in desert regions disrupt habitats, while wind turbines in forested areas alter bird and bat populations. Hydropower dams, another form of green energy, flood valleys and displaced communities, reshaping rivers and forests alike. The electric forest, in this sense, is not just metaphorical. It is real. A space where trees and turbines stand side by side, where ecosystems and energy systems overlap, and where the boundaries between nature and machine blur. Yet this entanglement of forests and technology cannot be understood without considering power in its political sense. Who controls the electric forest? Who decides how forests are used? Who benefits and who suffers? The history of resource exploitation suggests that the answer is rarely equitable. Wealthy nations and corporations often dominate decisions, while local communities bear the costs. Carbon offset programs, for example, have been used by companies in the global north to compensate for emissions by funding tree planting in the global south. But these programs sometimes displace local farmers, reduce land rights, or fail to deliver promised climate benefits. The electric forest, framed as a solution, becomes another site of injustice. where the powerful harvest not only energy but also legitimacy, while the powerless are left entangled in consequences. The symbolic power of forests also makes them central to cultural narratives of the climate struggle. Forests are often portrayed as lungs of the planet, ancient guardians of life, or symbols of resilience. To turn them into sites of geoengineering is to transform this symbolism. The electric forest becomes a contested myth, representing both hope and hubris. On one hand, it is a vision of humanity working with nature to heal the climate. On the other, it is a warning of overreach, where even the most sacred natural spaces are reduced to components of a planetary machine. This tension runs through every discussion of geoengineering. The desire for salvation through innovation versus the fear of losing what makes life meaningful in the first place. The ecological risks of re-engineering forests are profound. Monoculture plantations, often used in large-scale tree planting schemes, store less carbon than diverse ecosystems and are more vulnerable to disease and fire. They may also reduce biodiversity, replacing complex webs of life with uniform stands of timber. Similarly, using forests for bioenergy could degrade soil, exhaust water supplies, and accelerate deforestation if not managed carefully. Even reforestation, when poorly planned, can cause harm. Planting trees in grasslands or peatlands, for example, can reduce biodiversity and release more carbon than is captured. The electric forest is thus a double-edged sword. It offers tools for carbon removal, but also risks entrenching ecological fragility. There is also the issue of permanence. Forests, unlike engineered carbon capture machines, are vulnerable to disturbance. Wildfires, pests and droughts, exacerbated by climate change, can turn forests from carbon sinks into carbon sources overnight. Entire years of sequestration can be undone in a single blaze. Relying too heavily on forests for geoengineering ignores their vulnerability and the unpredictability of the world. The electric forest may appear stable, but it is built on fragile foundations. Despite these risks, the potential of forests remains undeniable. Reforestation, when done carefully, can restore ecosystems, protect watersheds, and support biodiversity while sequestering carbon. Community-led projects that integrate indigenous knowledge and local needs can enhance resilience rather than undermine it. Agroforestry, integrating trees with crops and livestock, can improve food security and soil health while absorbing carbon. In these cases, the electric forest is not imposed but cultivated, not a machine that extracts but a system that regenerates. The distinction lies not in the forest itself, but in the values and governance that shape its use. The geopolitical implications of forests as geoengineering tools are significant. Countries with vast forest resources, such as Brazil, Indonesia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, hold disproportionate influence in global climate negotiations. Their decisions about deforestation, conservation, and reforestation affect global carbon balances. Yet these countries often face economic pressures to exploit forests for agriculture, mining, or logging. International funding mechanisms, such as REDD+, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation, aim to support forest conservation, but they are plagued by challenges of corruption, inequity, and measurement. The electric forest, as a global asset, becomes a site of struggle between national sovereignty and international responsibility. Technology adds another dimension to this struggle. Advances in satellite monitoring, drones, and artificial intelligence allow for precise tracking of forest cover and carbon stocks. These tools empower conservation efforts, but also raise concerns about surveillance and control. Who owns the data? Who decides how it is used? As forests become more tightly integrated into global carbon markets, the risk of commodification grows. The electric forest is no longer just a living ecosystem, but a ledger of carbon credits, a financial instrument traded across borders. This commodification can strip forests of their cultural and ecological meaning, reducing them to numbers in a market. The fight for Earth's future is therefore inseparable from the fate of its forests. Whether through reforestation, bioenergy, or renewable energy infrastructure, forests are central to geoengineering visions. They are also central to questions of justice, sovereignty, and meaning. The electric forest is not only about carbon, it is about power. Who has it, who uses it, and who is excluded from it. At the heart of this story lies a paradox. Forests are both natural and engineered, both fragile and resilient, both local and global. To treat them solely as tools for geoengineering is to misunderstand their complexity. Yet to ignore their potential is to miss an opportunity for survival. The electric forest challenges humanity to reconcile innovation with humility, ambition with restraint. It asks whether we can design systems that enhance balance rather than entangle it further. The stakes could not be higher. In a world heating faster than expected, forests may represent one of the last frontiers where nature and technology meet in the fight for survival. But the outcome will depend on choices, whether we pursue monoculture plantations or biodiverse restoration, whether we prioritize profit or justice, whether we see forests as machines or as living communities. The electric forest is both a vision of hope and a warning of hubris. The fight for Earth's future will be decided in the spaces where trees and turbines, ecosystems and economies intertwine. If humanity succeeds, the electric forest may become a model of partnership, where technology supports regeneration and power is shared fairly. If we fail, it may become a symbol of collapse, where the attempt to engineer survival entangles us in new forms of exploitation and fertility. Either way, the story of the electric forest will be the story of our age, an age where the boundaries between nature and machine dissolve, and the fate of the planet is written in the spaces where they meet. The electric forest, as a vision and a reality, cannot be fully understood without delving into the systems of power, economics and justice that shape how geoengineering intersects with the living world. If Part 1 outlined the entanglement of forests with technology and human ambition, then Part 2 must go deeper into the tensions this entanglement creates. The fight for Earth's future is not happening in pristine laboratories or on distant satellites alone. It is happening in the forests themselves, where carbon, energy, and politics converge. The electric dimension is not only about wires and turbines, but about the currents of power, who controls them, who benefits, and who is left behind. One of the most pressing realities of the electric forest is its relationship with land. Forests cover about a third of the Earth's land area, but every hectare is contested. For centuries, forests have been cleared for timber, agriculture, and settlements. Now, in the age of climate crisis, they are being recast as engines of carbon removal, sites for renewable infrastructure, or reserves of biodiversity. But land is finite. Using it for one purpose often means sacrificing another. If millions of hectares are converted into bioenergy plantations, what happens to food production? If land is set aside for carbon offsets, what happens to indigenous communities that rely on it for survival? The electric forest is therefore a battleground of competing claims, where ecological goals collide with human rights, and where the balance of priorities reveals the deeper values of societies. The idea of bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, BECS, illustrates this tension vividly. In theory, BECS could generate energy while removing carbon from the atmosphere. In practice, it requires enormous amounts of land to grow biomass, land that could otherwise grow food, support biodiversity, or sustain local communities. Large-scale BECS could demand monoculture plantations stretching across continents, displacing small farmers and indigenous peoples. It could drive up food prices, worsening hunger in already vulnerable regions. Proponents argue that BECS is one of the few scalable negative emissions technologies, but critics warn it is a fantasy built on unrealistic assumptions. In this vision of the electric forest, trees are no longer valued as habitats or cultural symbols, but as inputs into an industrial machine. The price of pursuing this vision could be ecological homogenization and social displacement on a global scale. Carbon offset programs represent another layer of contestation. These schemes allow corporations and governments to compensate for emissions by funding tree planting or forest conservation elsewhere. In theory, this creates a win-win. Emissions are balanced, while forests are protected. But in reality, offset programs often fall short. Some projects exaggerate their benefits, counting carbon that would have been absorbed anyway. Others plant monocultures that degrade ecosystems rather than restore them. In some cases, local communities lose access to their land, as forests are commodified into carbon credits sold on international markets. The electric forest here becomes not a site of regeneration, but a ledger for financial speculation, where the complexities of ecosystems are reduced to numbers traded by the powerful. The result is not justice, but exploitation, with forests serving as scapegoats for continued emissions elsewhere. This commodification is part of a broader trend toward turning forests into instruments of global governance. Nations rich in forest resources, such as Brazil, Indonesia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, hold disproportionate influence in climate negotiations. Their decisions about deforestation or conservation have global consequences. Yet these nations often face economic pressures that push them toward exploitation rather than preservation. Logging, mining, and agriculture promise immediate profits, while conservation requires long-term investment. International funding mechanisms like REDD+, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation, aim to make conservation financially viable, but they have struggled with corruption, inequity, and inefficiency. The electric forest, framed as a global asset, becomes a site where national sovereignty clashes with international responsibility. The question is whether the world can build mechanisms that honor both local rights and global needs, or whether the struggle for forests will deepen global fractures. Technology complicates this struggle further. Advances in satellite monitoring, drones, and artificial intelligence allow for unprecedented tracking of forest cover and carbon stocks. These tools can empower conservation by exposing illegal logging, guiding reforestation, and verifying carbon credits. But they also raise concerns about surveillance and control. Who owns the data collected by satellites flying over sovereign nations? Who decides how it is used? If forests become data-driven assets in global carbon markets, the risk is that technological tools will reinforce existing power imbalances, concentrating control in wealthy nations or corporations while marginalizing local communities. The electric forest in this scenario is not just electrified by power lines, but by digital networks that transform trees into nodes in a planetary database. The ecological consequences of transforming forests into geoengineering sites are immense. Forests are complex, adaptive systems. They regulate water cycles, anchor soils, provide habitats, and create microclimates. When forests are engineered for carbon or energy, these functions are often disrupted. Monoculture plantations store less carbon than diverse forests and are more vulnerable to pests and disease. Large-scale bioenergy crops can deplete soils and water supplies. Even reforestation, when poorly planned, can harm ecosystems by planting trees in grasslands or wetlands where they do not belong. The electric forest risks becoming a fragile, artificial construct, one that appears green from above but is ecologically impoverished below. The danger is that in trying to engineer resilience, humanity may create new forms of vulnerability, leaving ecosystems less capable of withstanding climate shocks. Yet forests also offer unique opportunities for balance if approached with humility. Community-led reforestation projects that integrate indigenous knowledge have shown remarkable success in restoring ecosystems while supporting livelihoods. Agroforestry systems, where trees are combined with crops and livestock, enhance biodiversity, improve soil health, and increase food security. Mangrove restoration projects protect coastlines from storms while absorbing carbon and sustaining fisheries. These examples show that forests can be sites of partnership between humans and nature, rather than domination. The electric forest does not have to be an industrial machine. It can be a living mosaic where technology supports ecological regeneration rather than replacing it. The challenge is scaling such models without losing their rootedness in local contexts. The fight for Earth's future in the forests is also a cultural struggle. Forests carry profound symbolic weight in human societies. They are sites of myth, spirituality, and identity. For many indigenous peoples, forests are not resources, but relatives, beings with intrinsic value and agency. To transform forests into instruments of geoengineering risks erasing these cultural meanings. It reduces sacred spaces to carbon spreadsheets, silencing voices that see forests as more than commodities. Resisting this reduction is not only a matter of justice, but of survival. Because cultural diversity, like biodiversity, strengthens resilience. A world where forests are valued only for their carbon is a world that has lost touch with the deeper relationships that sustain planets. Power, in this context, is not limited to energy or politics. It is also symbolic. The image of the electric forest can inspire hope or provoke fear, depending on how it is framed. If presented as a vision of harmony, where machines and trees work together for survival, it can mobilize support and innovation. If presented as a vision of domination, where forests are stripped of meaning and turned into machines, it can provoke resistance and backlash. Narratives matter because they shape the choices societies make. The fight for Earth's future is therefore also a fight for imagination. How do we envision the relationship between technology and nature? The answer will determine whether the electric forest becomes a symbol of renewal or collapse. Geopolitics, economics, ecology, technology, culture, these are all currents that flow through the electric forest. But at the core is a simple question. Can humanity engineer survival without losing balance? Geoengineering, in its many forms, is tempting because it offers speed. Forests, however, remind us that balance requires patience. Trees grow slowly, ecosystems adapt over decades, and resilience cannot be rushed. The danger of the electric forest is that in trying to accelerate survival, humanity may short-circuit the very systems it depends on. Yet the opportunity is that by weaving technology into ecosystems carefully, respectfully and justly, it may be possible to create a future where forests and power systems coexist in mutual support. The electric forest, then, is both a warning and an invitation. It warns of the dangers of commodification, exploitation and hubris, where forests become machines and communities are displaced. But it also invites us to imagine new models of partnership, where technology supports regeneration and power is shared fairly. The fight for Earth's future will not be won in laboratories alone. It will be won in the forests, where the choices we make about land, justice and balance will determine the path ahead. The question is whether humanity can resist the lure of domination and embrace the humility required to work with nature rather than against it. The answer will shape not only the fate of the forests, but the fate of the planet itself. The electric forest, as both metaphor and reality, reaches its most charged form when we confront the clash between ambition and restraint, urgency and caution, exploitation and justice. Forests, which once stood as untamed sanctuaries of biodiversity and carbon storage, are now being reimagined as components in a planetary machine. Turbines rise above tree canopies, solar grids carve pathways through jungles, and monoculture plantations stretch where ancient ecosystems once thrived. This vision of the electric forest is no longer confined to theory. It is unfolding in real time. And yet, whether this transformation becomes a symbol of renewal or collapse depends on the choices humanity makes in the coming decades. The fight for Earth's future is being waged not just in boardrooms and laboratories, but in the soil, roots and branches of forests worldwide. One of the starkest tensions lies in the question of scale. Geoengineering ideas that involve forests often require vast landscapes, planting billions of trees, cultivating biomass for BCX, or deploying renewable energy infrastructure across forested regions, all demand land on a planetary scale. Scale is what makes these projects appear powerful, large enough to counteract global emissions, but scale is also what makes them dangerous. The bigger the project, the greater the risk of unintended consequences. Monocultures may absorb carbon quickly, but they strip away biodiversity, leaving ecosystems brittle and vulnerable to pests, fire or drought. Massive bioenergy plantations may promise negative emissions, but they consume land and water that communities need for food. The push for scale can erase nuance, ignoring the delicate complexity of ecosystems in favor of uniformity and efficiency. In the pursuit of survival, humanity risks flattening the very diversity that underpins resilience. This obsession with scale reflects a deeper cultural pattern, the belief that bigger is always better, that only massive interventions can solve massive problems. Yet history tells a more complicated story. Large-scale interventions often come with unintended costs that outweigh their benefits. Mega dams, once celebrated as marvels of engineering, displaced millions and destroyed river ecosystems. Industrial agriculture, hailed as a solution to hunger, depleted soils and polluted waterways. The electric forest, pursued recklessly, could repeat these mistakes on a planetary scale. The lesson is clear. Survival cannot be engineered solely through science. It requires wisdom, humility, and attention to the fine-grained realities of ecosystems and communities. Power, both literal and metaphorical, runs through the electric forest. On a literal level, renewable energy infrastructure transforms landscapes into power stations. Wind turbines rise above treetops, power lines cut through canopies, and dams flood valleys. These systems generate clean energy, but they also disrupt habitats, alter water flows, and fragment ecosystems. On a metaphorical level, power determines who decides how forests are used. Governments, corporations, and international institutions often dominate decisions, while local communities, those who live in and depend on forests, are sidelined. The electric forest becomes a mirror of global inequality, where the powerful harvest energy and legitimacy, while the powerless absorb the costs. If geoengineering is to avoid deepening injustice, power must be redistributed, giving communities real authority over the forests they inhabit. Without this, the electric forest will be yet another chapter in the long history of exploitation. Economics intensifies these imbalances. Carbon markets and offset schemes treat forests as tradable assets, reducing complex ecosystems to units of carbon credit. Companies in wealthy nations use these credits to compensate for emissions, while communities in poorer regions lose access to land and resources. This commodification shifts forests from being shared commons into privatized assets, managed for distant investors rather than local stewards. The electric forest becomes an arena of speculation, where the survival of ecosystems depends less on ecological health than on market prices. This economic entanglement risks undermining trust, as people see forests not as sacred or communal, but as tools in a global financial game. Trust is critical for collective survival, and without it, even the most well-intentioned geoengineering projects may falter. Yet forests also offer possibilities for reimagining power and economics in more equitable ways. Community-led reforestation projects show that when local people control forests, outcomes are often more sustainable and just. Agroforestry systems, blending crops, livestock and trees, improve food security while sequestering carbon. Payment for ecosystem services schemes, if designed fairly, can compensate communities for conservation without displacing them. In these models, the electric forest is not an industrial machine, but a living system integrated with human needs and cultural traditions. These examples show that technology and nature need not be in opposition. They can be woven together in ways that regenerate balance rather than destroy it. The challenge lies in scaling such models without erasing their rootedness in local contexts. Ecologically, the risks of pursuing forests as geoengineering tools are undeniable. Forests are dynamic, adaptive systems, but they are not invulnerable. Climate change itself is destabilizing through wildfires, droughts, pests, and storms. Adding new pressures, turning them into carbon machines or energy factories, risks pushing them past tipping points. If vast plantations burn, they release more carbon than they sequester. If bioenergy crops exhaust soils, they reduce long-term productivity. If dams disrupt river systems, they collapse fisheries and floodplains. The electric forest, when engineered without ecological wisdom, becomes fragile, brittle, and unstable. In a warming world, fragility is a recipe for disaster. Survival cannot be secured by building brittle systems that collapse under stress. It requires resilient systems built on diversity, adaptability, and balance. The symbolic power of forests amplifies the stakes. Forests are not just carbon sinks or energy sites, they are symbols of life itself. For many cultures, forests are sacred, inhabited by spirits, ancestors, and stories. To transform them into geoengineering machines risks eroding this symbolic richness, reducing sacred spaces to spreadsheets and power grids. This cultural loss matters because narratives shape how societies act. If forests are seen only as tools, they will be treated as expendable. If they are seen as living communities, they may be treated with respect. The fight for Earth's future in the electric forest is therefore also a fight over meaning. What do forests represent, and how will those meanings guide humanity's choices? Technology is at the heart of this meaning-making. Satellites, drones, and AI systems allow unprecedented monitoring of forests, tracking deforestation, carbon stocks, and biodiversity. These tools can empower conservation, making visible what was once hidden. But they also risk turning forests into data, abstracted from the people and species who live within them. Data-driven governance, while powerful, can become detached from lived realities, imposing solutions from above rather than emerging from below. The electric forest, electrified by digital networks as well as power grids, risks becoming a space where decisions are made by algorithms rather than communities. Technology must therefore be guided by values of justice, inclusion and humility, if it is to serve balance rather than domination. The geopolitics of forests adds another layer of tension. Nations with vast forest resources hold immense bargaining power in climate negotiations, but they also face intense economic pressures to exploit those resources. International agreements and funding mechanisms attempt to incentivize conservation, but they are plagued by mistrust and competing interests. Wealthy nations, responsible for the bulk of historic emissions, often demand that forest-rich nations conserve, while continuing to consume at unsustainable levels. This hypocrisy fuels resentment, making cooperation fragile. The electric forest becomes a stage for global hypocrisy, where words of sustainability mask patterns of exploitation. To overcome this, global cooperation must be rooted in fairness, with wealthy nations bearing greater responsibility for funding conservation and reducing their own emissions. Without fairness, the fight for forests will become another casualty of global inequality. Ultimately, the electric forest forces humanity to confront a deeper question: can survival be engineered without balance? The temptation of geoengineering lies in its promise of control, its ability to deliver rapid results at scale. But survival is not simply about control, it is about relationship. Forests remind us that life thrives in interconnection, diversity, and reciprocity. The electric forest, pursued as domination, risks severing these relationships. Pursued as partnership, it could strengthen. The path humanity chooses will determine whether forests become symbols of renewal or collapse. The call to action is clear. The electric forest is not a distant possibility. It is being built now in the choices of governments, corporations, and communities. Citizens cannot remain passive. You can demand accountability from leaders who frame forests as commodities while ignoring justice. You can support community-led projects that regenerate ecosystems and livelihoods. You can resist narratives that present monocultures and mega-projects as solutions while ignoring their ecological and social costs. And you can participate in building new stories where forests are seen not as machines but as living partners in survival. Crisis Lens exists to bring these complexities into focus. The climate crisis is the defining struggle of our time, and forests are at its heart. The electric forest is both a vision of salvation and a warning of hubris. Its fate, and ours, depends on the choices we make now. Will we build brittle machines of survival or resilient systems of balance? Will we repeat the mistakes of exploitation or learn to work with nature in humility? The fight for Earth's future is unfolding in the forests, and every voice matters. Subscribe to Crisis Lens for deeper analysis of global crises. Share this message with those who need to understand the stakes and join the movement for accountability and justice. The electric forest is not just a metaphor, it is our reality. And in that forest, the future of the planet is being written. Together, we can choose to write a story of renewal rather than collapse. The choice is ours. The time